I hate Python, but not really. I just don't think it should be the first language you learn. I think learning something like Java first has a lot of benefits over Python. Even though you'll hear people say Python is easier to read, it reads like English. It's shorter, it can be used to make anything, web apps, data science, machine learning. I think Java is still a much better option if you're just starting out. I suggest Java, even though it's a bit more clunky, verbose, it doesn't look as nice, maybe it's a bit harder to read as a beginner. It gives you a lot of tips and hints about what exactly is going on that Python doesn't give you, and it can help really solidify the beginner principles. Let's take a look at this screenshot. So I've got two functions here. I've got snippet and I've got snippet short in Python. And basically all these functions do is they take in a number. In our case it's x, and I use 5. And we're going to take x to the power of 2, so 5 to the power of 2, and we're going to print it out for the user. And if we run this, we see it prints out 25 and 25. And now let's look at the same snippet of code in Java. We see that we have this public static void main, and that's really there because Java's object-oriented by default. And it's the entry point to our program. And then we have int x equals 5, so it's the same thing we did in Python, but we do have to specify it's an int. We have to specify it's an integer, it's a whole number. And then we can just print it out like this, where it just system.out.println x times x. Or if we want to make a function like we did in Python, we've got to use this syntax. So basically, here we have to say this function or this method we have here is going to return an int, and it's going to take in an int, or int x here, and just going to return x times x, which we print out up above. So the main reason that I prefer Java here as a beginner is because it makes you specify this is an int, this is a whole number. Because if we use Python, let's make a quick correction here. We get this big error, right? It says basically we cannot do test times test because it's a string. If we try this in Java and we have test in here instead of a number, right away this goes right underneath it saying you can't do this. Even before you run the program, we're going to tell you this is not allowed. It needs to be a whole number. It's got to be an integer. The second reason I suggest that you learn Java over Python, it doesn't have to be Java. I think there's a lot of good languages, C#, but Java is kind of the main one, and it's because of how many resources there are. You'll find a lot of resources for both. Both are both have very large communities. You see Java has been around forever. Everything's been built in Java. Python, it's kind of got popular. It's older than Java, but it got popular a bit later. But you still find pretty much anything made in it. However, you might see something like this in Python. And this, unless you know Python and you kind of got an idea of what's going on, you're going to be lost. They kind of short form everything. They try and make it all into one line, which if you see this as a beginner, you're done for. With Java, it's a bit more explicit. You'll have these 9 lines instead of this one line to do the same thing. And you might say that's a lot more writing to do. You see the steps going one by one. Another reason I suggest learning Java over Python is that even though you see Python can do anything, you can make games, you can make web apps, you can do data science, machine learning. A lot of the time, it's not the best tool for the job. Like, for example, games. Games will be a bit slower. You'll have a lot of code to write compared to using something like Unity, which is C#, where although you have less control over what's going on, it's a lot easier to pick up as beginners. Web dev, you're going to need to learn JavaScript either way. I mean, you can do some HTML template stuff in Python, but you're really going to need to learn JavaScript to take it to the next level. You're going to want to learn React, Angular, something like that, a library or a framework. I will say though, if you want to get into Python for data science or machine learning, those are probably your 2 best use cases. I mean, although you can do this in C++ or C, you don't want to, especially not as a beginner, because you'll run into problems with pointers and stuff you really don't want to concern yourself with as a beginner. Also, if we take a look at how Python structures its syntax, you'll see a lot of the time all the time, you have these indentations, which I think by convention it's meant to be 4 spaces. I use a tab. I don't think you're supposed to, but anyway, you'll run into problems where you might have a wrong indentation as a beginner. It might not be obvious. You might have an extra space hidden somewhere. And if you read the error codes, you'll probably be able to find out where your error is. But with Java, and not only Java, but pretty much any other language, a lot of them use a C-like syntax, which basically means we have these brackets. And everything that's going to run in this function here is what's between those brackets. That's it. That's all. Anything outside the brackets is not part of the function. So I find, for me at least, having those brackets, having the curly braces, it's easier for me to understand what's going on, how big the code block is, and what's going to be executed than with the indentations. And just like at a quick glance is probably a lot easier as well. So overall, I think Java is probably a better programming language to pick up first. But that being said, if you've already started with Python, I think you should keep writing code in Python. I think the main thing is to sit down at the computer, write code, try and figure out how things are working, what all these conditionals do, what these loops do, and whether you're using Java, Python, the concepts will stick. I think it's probably a bit easier to make them stick if you're using Java, but either way is probably fine. So just stick with what you've started with. If you haven't started with anything yet, I'd probably go Java, C#, something that's not Python, something that's statically typed.